This company didn't lose because it failed to see the future. It lost because it believed the future was beneath it. At its peak, Blockbuster had the chance to own the company that would later destroy it. Instead, they laughed, dismissed it, and walked away from a decision that would cost them everything. By the end of this story, you'll understand the exact decision that turned Blockbuster's dominance into a case study in corporate blindness. And it wasn't technology moving too fast. It was a mistake that made perfect sense at the time. Thousands of stores, a global brand, and a customer base that trusted them with Friday nights. They also had the opportunity to buy Netflix, when it was small, unprofitable, and asking to be taken seriously. To understand how this decision was made, we need to go back to a moment when Blockbuster still looked unstoppable and Netflix looked irrelevant. By the late 1990s, Blockbuster wasn't just a company, it was infrastructure. With over 9,000 stores worldwide, it had embedded itself into the physical routine of entertainment. Friday nights followed a pattern: drive, park, browse, decide, rent. Blockbuster wasn't competing for attention. It owned the habit. Revenue climbed into the billions. Market share remained untouchable. Late fees alone generated hundreds of millions of dollars each year. Inside the company, there was no sense of urgency. The model worked. The stores were full. The cash flow was predictable. Smaller competitors struggled to keep up. Independent rental stores disappeared quietly, one by one. From the inside, there was no visible threat. Nothing was breaking. Nothing was failing. Nothing demanded reinvention. Meanwhile, far outside Blockbuster's world, a tiny company was mailing DVDs one envelope at a time. It didn't look like competition. It didn't look scalable. And it certainly didn't look dangerous. As long as customers kept showing up, the future felt manageable, even inevitable. But dominance has a side effect. It changes what a company listens for and what it learns to ignore. The most dangerous problems don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, disguised as sensible choices. Blockbuster's success was built on a simple equation: physical stores, high turnover, and penalties for late returns. Late fees weren't a flaw in the system. They were one of its most reliable revenue streams. Every internal incentive pointed in the same direction: protect the store, protect the fee, protect the existing behavior. Outside the system, Netflix was experimenting with something Blockbuster didn't value: removing friction. From Blockbuster's perspective, Netflix wasn't innovative. It was inefficient. The question wasn't, what are customers trying to avoid? It was, how do we protect what already works? The two companies weren't competing yet. They weren't even speaking the same language. Customers were already signaling discomfort, with penalties, deadlines, and friction that felt increasingly unnecessary. Internally, the logic was airtight. Removing late fees meant weakening the very system that paid for everything else. What no one saw was that the problem wasn't the fee, it was the assumption beneath it. And soon, that assumption would be tested in a meeting that would quietly lock the outcome in place. The point of no return rarely feels dramatic. It usually arrives disguised as a routine meeting on an ordinary day. In the year 2000, Blockbuster was still the undisputed leader of home entertainment. Across the table sat a small startup, still unprofitable, still searching for validation. Netflix wasn't asking to replace Blockbuster. It was asking to be absorbed, to become a digital extension of an empire that already existed. The price was $50 million. For a company generating billions in revenue, it barely registered as a risk. But the question wasn't the price. It was whether the idea itself deserved respect. No one asked what would happen if customers stopped tolerating friction. To Blockbuster, Netflix looked small. To Netflix, Blockbuster looked slow. The proposal wasn't debated, it wasn't escalated, it was dismissed. Later accounts would describe the response as polite and quietly amused. That was it. No follow-up, no counteroffer, no second meeting. The decision took minutes. Its consequences would last decades. Two companies left that room on opposite trajectories. What followed didn't feel like failure at first. It felt like business as usual. At first, the change was subtle. Stores were still open, revenue was still coming in. But something had shifted beneath the surface. Customers were no longer choosing between movies. They were choosing between inconvenience and avoidance. Netflix removed deadlines, removed penalties, and quietly removed the reason to visit a store at all. Inside Blockbuster, the data arrived slowly and softened by averages. The response was cautious. Adjustments were discussed, experiments were approved, but nothing challenged the core assumption. The very scale that once protected Blockbuster now worked against it. Rent didn't shrink. Staffing didn't shrink. Inventory didn't shrink. Customers didn't complain. They didn't protest. They simply stopped coming back. Netflix scaled without stores, without late fees, and without asking permission from the past. For the first time, the weakness became visible. Inside the company, pressure rose, but clarity did not. The market didn't wait for Blockbuster to catch up. It moved on. And when companies collapse, the cost is never abstract. Long before the headlines, the impact was felt at the edges, in places far from boardrooms and strategy decks. The work didn't change. The routines didn't change, but the confidence beneath them quietly disappeared. No one announced what was coming. There were no explanations, just rumors and uncertainty. Hours were reduced. Shifts disappeared. And slowly, so did people. For the people inside the system, collapse wasn't a headline. It was a moment. Quiet, awkward, and final. Thousands of stores meant thousands of lives, briefly intersecting with a company that could no longer carry them. When systems fail slowly, the human cost arrives quietly. But none of this was random, and none of it was inevitable. By the time Blockbuster collapsed, the explanation seemed obvious. Technology changed. Consumer behavior shifted. Streaming won. But those explanations are incomplete, and more importantly, they're comforting. Blockbuster didn't fail because it ignored technology. It failed because success reshaped how it interpreted reality. When systems work for long enough, they stop being evaluated. They become filters, deciding what information is taken seriously and what is dismissed. Blockbuster didn't resist change. It optimized relentlessly for a world that was already fading. Every decision made sense in isolation. Together, they formed a logic that prevented adaptation. Netflix didn't win because it was smarter. It won because it had nothing to protect. This pattern repeats whenever success becomes identity, and identity becomes constraint. And that's why this story isn't really about Blockbuster or Netflix. In reality, the outcome was decided quietly, years earlier, in rooms that felt safe, logical, and completely in control. And that's why this story keeps repeating across industries, across decades, and across companies that look invincible right up until they aren't. Not because the future is unpredictable, but because success makes it easy to stop listening. That's how Blockbuster lost the future, long before it ever looked like it was failing.